The air in Echo Park smelled like jasmine and exhaust fumes on the morning they came for Quinn Torres. It was the kind of morning that made you believe Los Angeles could still be beautiful. The sun filtering through the jacaranda trees in purple-tinged light, the lake reflecting silver, the sound of a street vendor's cart bells mixing with distant traffic. Quinn stood on the porch of the community center, a coffee cup warming her hands, watching a heron pick its way along the water's edge with that prehistoric patience birds seemed to carry in their bones. She didn't see the unmarked cars until they were already pulling up to the curb. 3 of them, black and anonymous against the morning brightness. Detective Sarah Brennan emerged first, her face carefully neutral in that way cops learn when they're about to destroy someone's world. She'd been coming to the center for 2 years now, ever since Quinn had helped her nephew get into a youth mentorship program. They'd shared coffee. They'd talked about the neighborhood, about the kids who needed more than the system could give them. Sarah had laughed at Quinn's stories about teaching teenagers to garden, about how the toughest kids always turned gentle when they held seeds. Now Sarah's eyes were hard and distant, like someone had drawn blinds behind them. Quinn Torres. Sarah's voice carried across the morning, official and strange. Quinn set down her coffee cup on the porch railing. The ceramic made a small sound against the wood, and she would remember that sound for years. How ordinary it was, how it marked the last moment of her life before everything split in two. Sarah? What's going on? For more officers had emerged from the vehicles now, spreading out with that choreographed precision that comes from practicing worst-case scenarios. Quinn's heart began to hammer against her ribs, but her mind couldn't catch up to what her body already knew. Behind her, through the open door of the center, she could hear Marcus Reyes setting up for the morning's SL class. The scrape of chairs on linoleum, the coffee maker gurgling its familiar song. Quinn Torres, you're under arrest for the murder of Jennifer Caldwell on March 17, 1999. Sarah's words came out flat and practiced, as if saying them without inflection could make them hurt less. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The world tilted. Quinn's hand went to the porch railing, gripping the worn wood that she'd helped sand and paint 3 summers ago when the center had gotten a community improvement grant. Jennifer Caldwell. The name was a ghost, a news story from another lifetime, a tragedy that had haunted Echo Park for 25 years. What? No, there's been a mistake. Quinn's voice sounded strange in her own ears. Too high, too thin. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Marcus appeared in the doorway behind her, his broad frame filling the space, his face confused and then alarmed. Quinn? What the hell is happening? Stay back, sir, one of the officers said, hand moving to his belt. She runs a community center, Marcus said, his voice rising. She teaches kids how to read. What are you talking about, murder? But Sarah was already moving forward, pulling handcuffs from her belt with hands that trembled just slightly. The only sign that this wasn't easy for her, that somewhere beneath the professional mask there was still a person who had sat in Quinn's kitchen and eaten homemade tamales. The metal was cold against Quinn's wrists. The clicking sound of the cuffs locking seemed impossibly loud, like a door slamming in a quiet house. Sarah, I didn't do anything. I don't understand. Jennifer Caldwell, I never even met her. I was 17 in 1999. I was just a kid. We have DNA evidence, Sarah said quietly, and there was something in her voice now, something that might have been regret or might have been satisfaction. New technology. Genealogical DNA testing. It's a match, Quinn. The morning sun seemed too bright now, aggressive, pressing against Quinn's eyes like an interrogation lamp. She could see neighbors emerging onto their porches, attracted by the commotion. Mrs. Chun from the corner store, holding her broom mid-sweep. The Ramirez twins on their bikes, frozen in the street. All of them watching as Quinn Torres, who had lived in Echo Park for 15 years, who had turned an abandoned warehouse into a thriving community hub, who knew everyone's names and their children's names and what kind of soup to bring when someone was sick, was led to a police car like a criminal, like a murderer. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The community center behind her looked smaller, suddenly vulnerable. Quinn could see the mural on the side wall that the teenagers had painted last spring. A phoenix rising from flames, wings spread wide in purple and gold and electric blue. Beneath it, in letters 3 feet high, "We rise together." The words seemed like a cruel joke now. "Marcus," Quinn called out as Sarah guided her toward the nearest vehicle, hand on her head like they do in movies. "Marcus, call my sister. Call Elena. Tell her." But what could she tell her? What words existed for this? "I'll call her right now," Marcus shouted back, and his voice cracked. "We'll figure this out, Quinn. We'll get you out." But as Quinn was folded into the back seat, as the door closed with that final, heavy sound that police car doors make, she saw his face through the window and read the doubt there. The same doubt she could see spreading across the faces of the neighbors, like a stain bleeding through fabric. Because how well did anyone really know anyone? How many years of good deeds did it take to prove you weren't a monster? And how quickly could all of it be erased by 5 words? Murder, DNA, 1999, cold case, arrest. The car pulled away from the curb, and Quinn watched the community center recede through the rear window. The heron was still by the lake, still fishing with that ancient patience. The jacaranda trees still bloomed purple against the blue sky. The world kept being beautiful even as hers was ending. Sarah drove in silence, her eyes on the road, her jaw tight. In the seat beside her, another detective, older, with gray threading through his dark hair, typed something into a tablet. Detective Raymond Park, Quinn would later learn. The one who had never given up on Jennifer Caldwell's case, who had spent 25 years waiting for technology to catch up to his instincts. "Can you at least tell me what you think I did?" Quinn asked, her voice steadier now. She'd found something solid in herself, some core of certainty. She was innocent. That had to matter. That had to count for something. Sarah's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, met Quinn's gaze for just a moment. Jennifer Caldwell was 19 years old. She was found strangled in MacArthur Park on March 18, 1999. She'd been a student at UCLA, studying environmental science. She wanted to save the kelp forests. Sarah's voice caught slightly on those last words. DNA evidence was collected at the scene, but the technology back then couldn't identify a suspect. Last month, we submitted the sample to a genealogical database. It matched to your family tree. Then we got a warrant for your DNA from the coffee cup you left at a city council meeting 3 weeks ago. Quinn's mind raced backward, trying to remember. City council meeting. She'd been advocating for more funding for after-school programs. She'd brought coffee from the cafe on Sunset, had left it on the table when she'd gone up to speak. Someone had taken it. Someone had been watching her, waiting. "I've never been to MacArthur Park," Quinn said. "I grew up in San Diego. I didn't move to LA until 2009. I was 17 in 1999. I was in high school. This is insane." "DNA doesn't lie," Detective Park said from the front seat, not turning around. His voice was gravelly, worn smooth by years of bad coffee and worse news. "Genealogical testing is 99.9% accurate. Your DNA was found on Jennifer Caldwell's body, on her neck specifically, where the killer's hands would have been." Quinn's stomach lurched. She tasted bile in the back of her throat, bitter and burning. "Then your test is wrong. Or contaminated. Or, I don't know. But I didn't kill anyone. Couldn't. I wouldn't." They drove through streets Quinn knew by heart, past the taco trucks and the botanicas, past the elementary school where she'd organized weekend literacy programs, past the murals and the corner stores and all the small human places that made Echo Park feel like home. People on the sidewalks turned to stare as the police car passed. Some of them would recognize her. By noon, everyone would know. By evening, her face would be on the news. The police station loomed ahead, a brutal concrete building that looked like it had been designed to crush hope. As they pulled into the garage, Quinn caught her reflection in the car window. A woman in her early 40s, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a community center t-shirt with a coffee stain on the collar. She looked ordinary. She looked like someone who taught people to read, who helped teenagers fill out college applications, who knew how to make arroz con pollo for 50 people. She didn't look like a murderer. But then, she thought, what did murderers look like? What did guilt look like when you saw it in the mirror? The booking process was methodical and dehumanizing. Fingerprints, photographs, personal belongings sealed in a plastic bag. Her phone, her wallet with photos of her nieces, the silver bracelet her sister had given her for her 40th birthday. They gave her orange scrubs to change into, processed her through a series of locked doors and buzzing gates, each one closing behind her with a sound like finality. In the holding cell, Quinn sat on a metal bench bolted to the wall and tried to understand how the universe had fractured. 24 hours ago, she'd been planning a fundraiser for new computers in the center's library. She'd been worried about whether they'd get enough donations, whether the grant application she'd submitted would come through. Normal worries, the kind that seemed laughable now. Jennifer Caldwell. Quinn tried to summon any memory, any connection. But there was nothing. Just the vague recollection of a news story from her senior year of high school. A tragedy in a city 3 hours north that had seemed distant and abstract, the way terrible things always do when they happen to other people in other places. She hadn't killed Jennifer Caldwell. That was the one solid thing Quinn knew, the bedrock truth she could stand on. But as she sat in that cell, watching the afternoon light move across the concrete floor in slow geometric patterns, she began to understand how little that truth might matter. Evidence mattered. DNA mattered. And according to the police, both of those things said she was guilty. Elena arrived at the police station 3 hours later, her face pale and tight with the kind of controlled panic that comes from being the older sister who has spent a lifetime solving problems. She was allowed 15 minutes in the visitor's room, separated from Quinn by scratched plexiglass and a telephone that smelled like other people's fear. "Tell me this is a mistake," Elena said, her hand pressed flat against the barrier as if she could push through it by will alone. "Tell me they've got the wrong person." "They do," Quinn said, and her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Elena, I swear to you I didn't do this. I've never even heard of Jennifer Caldwell except from news stories. I was 17. I was in San Diego. Remember? Spring of 1999. I was finishing my junior year at Lincoln High. You'd just started your internship at the hospital." Elena's eyes were red-rimmed but dry. She'd always been the practical one, the one who faced catastrophes with lists and action plans. I remember everything about that year. You were stressed about the SATs. You were dating that boy, what was his name? Miguel? With the terrible poetry. Mario. And his poetry was actually pretty good." Quinn felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her chest. They were talking about bad high school poetry while her life dissolved around them. "I've called Richard Castellano," Elena said. Richard was a lawyer, someone from Elena's husband's firm. "He's good, Quinn. He's defended people in murder cases before. He'll know what to do." "DNA evidence," Quinn said hollowly. "They say they have DNA evidence. How do you fight that?" "We'll figure it out." Elena's voice had that fierce determination that Quinn remembered from childhood. The same tone Elena had used when defending Quinn from bullies, when advocating for her at parent-teacher conferences after their parents died, when helping her apply to colleges with money they didn't have. Maybe the sample was contaminated. Maybe there was a mix-up at the lab. Maybe I have an evil twin no one told me about? Quinn tried to smile, but it felt wrong on her face. Elena didn't laugh. "This is going to be bad, Quinn. The media will be all over this. Cold case solved after 25 years? DNA breakthrough? You know how they love that stuff. And the community center. What about the center?" Elena's expression told her everything before the words came. "The board is having an emergency meeting tonight. Marcus called me. They're talking about temporary suspension of operations, about distancing themselves from me." Quinn felt something inside her chest collapse, like a building falling in on itself floor by floor. The community center wasn't just her job. It was her purpose, her proof that she mattered, that she'd made something good out of the wreckage of a difficult childhood. She'd built it from nothing, begging for grants, converting an abandoned warehouse, recruiting volunteers, fighting city bureaucracy at every turn. For 15 years, it had been her life. They're scared, Elena said softly. People don't know what to think. The DNA evidence, I know how it looks. Quinn's voice came out sharper than she intended. I know everyone's going to assume I'm guilty, but I'm not. Elena, you have to believe me. I do believe you. Elena's hand pressed harder against the plexiglass. I believe you completely, but belief isn't going to be enough. We need evidence. We need to prove you were somewhere else when Jennifer Caldwell died. Do you remember March 17th, 1999? Anything at all? Quinn closed her eyes, tried to reach back 25 years through the accumulated debris of memory. She would have been 17, finishing her junior year of high school. March in San Diego, warm but not hot yet. The jacarandas blooming purple like they did here in Echo Park. But specific days, specific moments, they'd blurred together into the general texture of being young and worried about grades and boys and what college might accept her. I don't remember, she admitted. It was 25 years ago, Elena. I barely remember what I did last March. We'll find something. Elena's voice was determined. Old calendars, school records, anything that places you in San Diego that day. You had perfect attendance, remember? Mom and Dad always made such a big deal about that. So there will be school records. There has to be proof. A guard appeared behind Elena, tapping his watch. Their 15 minutes were up. I love you, Elena said quickly. We're going to fix this. I promise you we're going to fix this. Quinn nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. She watched her sister disappear through the door, watched the last familiar face vanish. And then she was alone again with the fluorescent lights and the smell of industrial cleaning products and the weight of an accusation she couldn't disprove. The days that followed had a nightmarish quality, each one stretching out impossibly long and then snapping shut like a trap. Richard Castellano came, expensive suit and sympathetic eyes, asking questions Quinn didn't know how to answer. How well did she know MacArthur Park? Had she ever visited Los Angeles as a teenager? Did she have any connection to UCLA, to environmental science programs, to Jennifer Caldwell's family? No. No to everything. No connections. No memories. No explanation for how her DNA could have ended up on a dead girl's neck in a park she'd never visited in a city she hadn't lived in yet. The arraignment was a blur. Quinn stood before a judge in a courtroom full of strangers and heard herself plead not guilty to first-degree murder. Bail was set at $2 million, impossible, astronomical. Richard argued that she was a respected community leader, that she had no criminal record, that she dedicated her life to helping others. But the prosecutor, a sharp-faced woman named Andrea Hollis, painted a different picture. 25 years of freedom that Jennifer Caldwell never got. A cold-blooded killer who'd built a life on a foundation of lies. A danger to the community she claimed to serve. The judge agreed with the prosecutor. Bail stood. Quinn was remanded to county jail to await trial. In jail, time became strange. Days measured not by sunlight but by the rhythm of meals, head counts, the distant sounds of other women crying or shouting or praying. Quinn's cellmate was a woman named Destiny who was awaiting trial for embezzlement and had a habit of talking in her sleep. At night, Quinn would lie on the thin mattress and listen to Destiny's mumblings about spreadsheets and offshore accounts and try to remember what it felt like to be free. She thought about Jennifer Caldwell constantly now. She'd read everything she could find in the jail library, newspaper articles from 1999, saved on microfiche. Jennifer had been 19, a sophomore at UCLA. She'd grown up in Pasadena, the only child of 2 teachers. She'd been on the track team in high school, had volunteered at an animal shelter, had wanted to study marine biology and save the kelp forests off the California coast. She'd been found in MacArthur Park on the morning of March 18th, strangled, her body left near the lake. No sexual assault, no robbery, just violence for its own sake, or so it had seemed. For 25 years, her murder had been unsolved. Her parents had aged into their 70s still seeking justice, still appearing on local news segments on the anniversary of her death, still asking anyone with information to come forward. And now, apparently, they had their answer. Quinn Torres, a woman who'd been a child herself when Jennifer died, who couldn't even remember that spring with any clarity. Marcus came to visit once a week, bringing news from the outside world. The community center had closed its doors indefinitely. The board had voted to suspend operations pending the outcome of Quinn's trial. Some people were defending her. The families she'd helped, the teenagers she'd mentored, the neighbors who'd known her for years. But others, maybe even most others, had already made up their minds. DNA evidence was too powerful, too scientific, too certain. They interviewed me, Marcus told her on his third visit, his face haggard. Police came to my apartment, asked about you, about the center, about whether I'd ever seen you act violent or unstable. What did you tell them? The truth, that you're the kindest person I know, that you once spent 3 hours helping an elderly woman fill out Social Security paperwork, that you cry at Disney movies, that you're physically incapable of killing a spider without feeling guilty about it. He tried to smile. I don't think they believed me. Do you believe me? Quinn asked quietly. Marcus's eyes met hers, and she saw the answer there before he spoke. I want to. God, Quinn, I want to believe you. But the DNA. I know how it looks. It's not just how it looks. It's science. And I don't understand how science could be wrong about something like this. Quinn felt something crack inside her chest. If Marcus doubted her, Marcus, who'd been her closest friend for 10 years, who'd helped her paint the center's walls and write grant proposals and stay up late stuffing envelopes for fundraising campaigns. If he doubted her, what hope did she have with anyone else? The news coverage was relentless. Quinn's face appeared on every local channel, in every newspaper. Cold case solved. Community leader arrested in 1999 murder. The articles recounted Jennifer Caldwell's death in excruciating detail, then pivoted to Quinn's biography with a tone that made every accomplishment sound sinister. The community center became evidence of manipulation. Her years of service became evidence of a need to appear virtuous. Even her work with troubled teenagers was reframed as suspicious. Had she been trying to relive her crime? To exert power over the vulnerable? Elena brought clippings to her visits, not because Quinn wanted to see them, but because she needed to know what she was up against. One article included interviews with community members. Mrs. Chun said she'd always thought Quinn was lovely, but now she wondered if she'd really known her at all. The Ramirez twins' mother said she felt sick thinking about how Quinn had been around her children. Even some of the teenagers from the center were quoted, their words tentative but damning. She always seemed nice, but I guess you never really know people. Only a few voices defended her unconditionally. Maria Santos, whose son Quinn had helped get into community college. Reverend Thomas from the Baptist Church, who'd worked with the center on food drives. And always Elena. At night, Quinn would lie awake and try to construct explanations that made sense. Could there have been a mistake at the lab? Could her DNA have been in some database somehow transferred or contaminated? Could there be someone out there who shared her genetic markers so closely that the test couldn't tell them apart? She knew nothing about forensic science, about DNA testing, about how any of this worked. All she knew was that she was innocent and no one believed her. Richard Castellano was working on her defense, but even he seemed grimly pessimistic. The genealogical DNA testing is new, he explained during one visit, but it's been used successfully in dozens of cold cases. The Golden State Killer was caught this way. It's accurate, Quinn. The science is solid. Then the science is wrong, she said stubbornly. Or, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Or there's something you don't remember. Sometimes trauma causes amnesia. Sometimes people block out. No. Quinn's voice was sharp enough to cut. No. I did not kill Jennifer Caldwell and then conveniently forget about it. That's not how this works. That's not how I work. But even as she said it, she wondered. Could a person commit murder and not remember? Could 17-year-old Quinn have traveled to Los Angeles, strangled a stranger, and then gone back to her normal life with no memory of it? The idea was absurd. But then, everything about this situation was absurd. The worst moments came when she was alone, when doubt crept in like cold water finding cracks. What if everyone else was right? What if the DNA didn't lie? What if there was some dark thing inside her that she'd never seen, never suspected. She'd snap awake from nightmares where her hands were around someone's throat, where she could feel bone and cartilage giving way beneath her fingers, where Jennifer Caldwell's face looked back at her with dying eyes. Then morning would come, and she'd remember who she was. Quinn Torres, who'd built a community center from abandoned dreams, who knew how to make teenagers laugh, who'd never even been in a fistfight, who was innocent of murder no matter what the DNA said. She had to believe that, because if she stopped believing it, she'd have nothing left to hold on to. The preliminary hearing came 6 weeks after Quinn's arrest, 6 weeks of jail time that felt like 6 years. She sat beside Richard Castellano at the defense table, wearing clothes Elena had brought. A simple blue blouse and gray slacks, carefully chosen to make her look respectable, unthreatening, human. Across the aisle, Andrea Hollis arranged her files with the precision of someone who'd never lost a case and didn't intend to start now. The courtroom was packed. Quinn could feel the weight of eyes on the back of her neck. Reporters, curious onlookers, Jennifer Caldwell's family. She'd seen them come in, an elderly couple moving slowly, grief carved into every line of their faces. Joseph and Margaret Caldwell, parents who'd buried their only child 25 years ago and had been waiting ever since for someone to pay. Judge Patricia Morgan presided, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every lie and seen every attempt at manipulation the legal system had to offer. She called the court to order, and the prosecution began to present its case. Dr. Evelyn Chun took the stand first, a forensic geneticist from the California Department of Justice. She was youngish, maybe mid-30s, with black-rimmed glasses and the careful diction of someone used to explaining complex concepts to laypeople. Andrea Hollis walked her through the basics of DNA testing, then moved to the specific evidence in Jennifer Caldwell's case. DNA was collected from the victim's body in 1999. Dr. Chin explained, her voice steady and professional. Specifically, epithelial cells were found on the victim's neck, consistent with skin-to-skin contact. The DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the combined DNA index system, but there were no matches at that time. And what changed? Hollis asked. Advances in technology. In 2023, we began using investigative genetic genealogy, IgG. We uploaded the unknown DNA profile to GEDmatch, a public genealogical database. The system identified several genetic relatives of the unknown subject. By building out a family tree and using traditional genealogical methods, we were able to narrow down the suspect pool to one individual, Quinn Torres. And how certain are you that Quinn Torres is the source of the DNA found on Jennifer Caldwell's body? Once we identified Ms. Torres as a possible match, we obtained a DNA sample from a discarded coffee cup at a public meeting. The analysis showed a complete match, all 20 core CODIS loci matched. The probability of this being a random match is approximately 1 in several billion. Quinn felt the courtroom shift, felt the collective intake of breath. 1 in several billion. How did you fight those odds? Richard cross-examined carefully. Dr. Chun, is it possible for DNA evidence to be contaminated? Yes, contamination is always a concern. However, in this case, the original evidence from 1999 was properly stored and sealed. Chain of custody was maintained, and the DNA profile was consistent across multiple tests performed 25 years apart. Is it possible for two unrelated people to share identical DNA profiles at all 20 CODIS loci? Dr. Chun adjusted her glasses. Theoretically, yes, identical twins would share the same DNA. And there's an extraordinarily small possibility of a random match, hence the 1 in several billion statistic. But barring identical twins or laboratory error, the DNA match is conclusive. Does Ms. Torres have an identical twin? Not to our knowledge. Could there have been laboratory error? We performed the test 3 times using different samples from the original evidence. All 3 tests produced identical results matching Ms. Torres's DNA profile. The likelihood of error is infinitesimally small. Richard sat down, his expression neutral but his shoulders tight with tension. The science was unassailable. That was the problem. You couldn't cross-examine DNA. Next came Detective Raymond Park, the man who'd spent 25 years refusing to let Jennifer Caldwell's case go cold. He was in his late 60s now, close to retirement, and this arrest was clearly his vindication. He walked the court through the original investigation, how Jennifer had been found by a jogger on the morning of March 18, 1999, how she'd been strangled with sufficient force to crush her hyoid bone, how there had been no witnesses, no clear motive, no suspects. "We investigated everyone in Jennifer's life," Park said, his voice gravelly with age and cigarettes. "Boyfriends, classmates, professors. We looked at registered sex offenders in the area. We followed every lead. But the DNA evidence didn't match anyone in our databases." "Why did you decide to use investigative genetic genealogy after so many years?" Hollis asked. "Because I never forgot Jennifer Caldwell. Because her parents deserved answers. When IgG became available and started solving other cold cases, I knew we had to try it. And it worked." Park's eyes found Quinn across the courtroom, and there was something like satisfaction in them. It worked. The final prosecution witness was Jennifer's father, Joseph Caldwell. He was 78 years old, stooped and frail, but his voice was strong when he spoke about his daughter. "She was going to save the ocean," he said, tears running freely down his weathered cheeks. "She used to tell us about the kelp forests, about how they were dying, and she was going to figure out how to bring them back. She was so smart, so determined. And someone took that away from her. Someone took our baby away." He looked directly at Quinn then, and the hatred in his eyes was like a physical blow. "For 25 years, we've been waiting for justice, waiting to know who killed our daughter. And now we know. Now we can finally have peace." Quinn wanted to stand up, to tell him she hadn't done it, that she'd been a child herself, that she understood his pain but she wasn't responsible for it. But Richard's hand on her arm kept her seated, kept her silent. Anything she said now would be used against her later. The defense's turn was brief and unsatisfying. Richard called witnesses to testify to Quinn's character. Reverend Thomas, Maria Santos, even Marcus, though his testimony was halting and clearly conflicted. They talked about the community center, about Quinn's years of service, about her gentleness and dedication. But character witnesses couldn't compete with DNA evidence. Everyone in the courtroom knew it. Richard also entered Quinn's high school attendance records from spring 1999. She'd been present at Lincoln High School in San Diego on March 17, 1999, the day Jennifer was killed. But the prosecution had an answer for that too. "Los Angeles is a 2-hour drive from San Diego," Andrea Hollis pointed out. "Ms. Torres could have left school, driven to Los Angeles, committed the murder, and returned the same day. She was 17, old enough to drive, old enough to plan." The judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. Bail remained unchanged, $2 million that might as well have been $2 billion. Quinn was led back to her cell in handcuffs, past reporters shouting questions, past Joseph Caldwell's hollow-eyed stare, past the weight of a world that had already convicted her. Back in jail, the notoriety made everything harder. Other inmates knew who she was now. Some avoided her like she carried a contagion. Others sought her out with a morbid curiosity. "What's it like to kill someone? Did she scream? Did you feel powerful?" Quinn stopped going to the common areas, spent most of her time in her cell, reading and rereading the case files Richard had provided, searching for something. Anything that could explain how her DNA had ended up on Jennifer Caldwell's body. Elena visited religiously, twice a week, her face growing thinner and more strained each time. "Carlos wants me to stop," she admitted one afternoon. Carlos was her husband, a corporate lawyer who'd always been practical to the point of coldness. "He says the media attention is affecting his firm. He says people are starting to ask questions about our family." "Then stop coming," Quinn said, even though the thought of losing Elena's visits was unbearable. "Absolutely not." Elena's voice was fierce. "You're my sister. I don't care what Carlos thinks. I don't care what anyone thinks." But Quinn could see the cost in her eyes. Elena had 2 daughters, 14 and 16. They were being harassed at school, their aunt's face plastered across news websites and social media. Elena's friends were pulling away, uncomfortable with the association. Even her job at the hospital was becoming difficult. Whispers in the hallway, patients requesting different nurses. "I'm destroying your life," Quinn said. "No. Whoever really killed Jennifer Caldwell destroyed both your lives. We're just collateral damage." The trial date was set for October, 6 months away. 6 more months in jail, waiting, while the prosecution built its case and Richard scrambled to construct a defense against irrefutable science. He hired his own forensic experts to review the DNA evidence, but they all came back with the same conclusion. The tests were properly conducted, the evidence was solid, the match was accurate. "What about frame-up?" Quinn asked desperately during one meeting. "Could someone have planted my DNA somehow?" Richard looked tired. "How? They'd need access to your DNA from 1999. You'd have been 17. Were you ever arrested? Ever submitted DNA for any reason?" "No. Never." "Then how would someone have obtained your DNA 25 years ago? And why? What possible motive would anyone have to frame you for a random murder in a city you didn't live in?" Quinn had no answers. Every explanation seemed more implausible than the last. The only thing that made sense was the truth. She was innocent. But truth apparently didn't matter when science said otherwise. In July, 3 months before trial, Richard found something. He came to visit with an expression Quinn had never seen on his face before. Something like hope, but cautious, carefully guarded. "I've been investigating your family history," he said. "Looking into your genealogy, trying to understand how the IgG test could have matched you. And Quinn, there's something strange." "Strange how?" "Your parents, Maria and Roberto Torres. They died when you were 10? Correct. Car accident. The memory was old scar tissue now. Painful but distant. Drunk driver. Elena was 18, about to start college. She gave up her scholarship to raise me. I pulled their records. Birth certificates, marriage license, death certificates. Everything checks out. But I also looked at your birth certificate." Richard pulled out a photocopy, slid it across the table. "This is a California birth certificate issued in 1982, listing Maria and Roberto Torres as your parents. Standard form, properly filed." "Okay, but I also found this. Another document, older, more faded. This is a record from St. Mary's Hospital in San Diego, dated December 15, 1981. A baby girl was born to Maria Torres. Birth weight, 6 pounds 3 ounces. But Quinn, the baby's name on this hospital record isn't Quinn. It's Sophia." Quinn stared at the document, her mind struggling to process the implication. "I don't understand. Who's Sophia? I don't understand. Who's Sophia?" Richard leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. According to the hospital records, Maria Torres gave birth to a daughter named Sophia on December 15, 1981. But your birth certificate, filed with the state 6 weeks later, lists your name as Quinn and your birth date as December 15, 1981. Same parents, same date, but different names on the hospital record versus the official birth certificate." Quinn's hands trembled as she held the faded hospital document. "Maybe they just changed their minds about my name? Parents do that sometimes. Right? Maybe. But there's more." Richard pulled out another file. "I hired a private investigator to dig deeper into your family history. He found adoption records that were sealed. I had to get a court order to access them, and the judge only granted it because of the murder charge. Quinn, you were adopted." The words hit like a physical blow. Quinn's vision tunneled, the edges of the room going dark and fuzzy. "What? No, that's not possible. Elena never. She would have told me." "Does Elena know?" "She can't. She would have said something. We don't keep secrets." But even as Quinn said it, she wondered. Elena had been 18 when their parents died, already an adult. What if there were things she'd known that she'd chosen to keep hidden? What if their parents had sworn her to secrecy? According to the records I found, Maria and Roberto Torres adopted an infant girl in February 1982. The adoption was finalized through a private agency that no longer exists. The biological parents' names are redacted, sealed by court order. But Quinn, the timing matches. You were born in December 1981, and 2 months later, you were adopted by the Torreses. Quinn's mind raced, trying to reorganize her entire understanding of herself. So Maria and Roberto aren't my biological parents? It appears not. And Sophia, the baby in the hospital record, what happened to her? I don't know. The hospital record doesn't indicate whether the baby survived, whether she was placed for adoption, whether... Richard paused, choosing his words carefully. It's possible Maria gave birth to Sophia and the child died shortly after. It's possible Sophia and you are the same person, and they changed your name as part of the adoption process. Or it's possible that there were 2 babies. Quinn's voice came out as a whisper. That Maria had a biological daughter named Sophia, and then they adopted me 2 months later. Yes, that's one possibility. But why would they do that? Why adopt another baby if they just had one of their own? Richard's expression was grave. That's what we need to find out. Because Quinn, if there was another baby, if you have a biological sibling out there somewhere who shares your DNA, the implication crashed over Quinn like a wave. Then the DNA evidence doesn't necessarily point to me. It could point to someone else with the same genetic profile. Exactly. If you have an identical twin, or even a close biological sibling, the IgG test could have matched to your family tree but identified the wrong person within that family. For the first time since her arrest, Quinn felt something other than despair. Hope was dangerous. She knew how far she could fall if this turned out to be another dead end, but she couldn't help it. This was an explanation that made sense. This was a way for both things to be true. The DNA evidence could be accurate, and she could still be innocent. We need to talk to Elena, Quinn said urgently. She might know something. She was 8 years older than me. She might remember things about my adoption, about whether there was another baby. I'll call her today, Richard promised. And Quinn, I'm also going to petition the court to order DNA testing of your biological relatives, if we can find them. If we can prove you have a sibling who could have been at that park in 1999, we might have grounds for reasonable doubt. That evening, Elena came to visit, called in urgently by Richard. Quinn watched her sister walk into the visiting room, saw the confusion and wariness on her face, and knew this conversation was going to shatter something between them. Did you know? Quinn asked as soon as Elena picked up the phone. No preamble, no gentle approach. Did you know I was adopted? Elena's face went white. Her hand gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles showed bone. For a long moment, she said nothing, and Quinn had her answer before the words came. Yes, Elena whispered. I knew. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The betrayal was physical, a knife sliding between Quinn's ribs. How long have you known? Since Mom and Dad died. I found the adoption papers when I was going through their documents, trying to figure out how to keep custody of you. I was 18, Quinn. You were 10. You'd just lost the only parents you'd ever known. What was I supposed to do? Tell you that you weren't really their biological child? That you'd been adopted? It would have destroyed you. So instead you lied to me for 32 years? Quinn's voice rose, drawing looks from the guard by the door. She forced herself to speak more quietly. Elena, I'm in jail for murder. I'm facing life in prison because someone with my DNA killed Jennifer Caldwell. And you never thought to mention that I was adopted? That there might be biological relatives out there I don't know about. I didn't know it mattered. Elena's eyes were wet now, tears spilling over. How could I have known? The adoption happened when you were 2 months old. I barely remember it. I remember Mom being pregnant and then she wasn't, and then suddenly there was a baby, I was 8 years old. I didn't understand the details. What do you remember? Anything about another baby? About someone named Sophia? Elena frowned, thinking. Sophia. That name is familiar. I think, God, this is so vague. I think Mom might have had a baby that died. Before you. I remember her being sad. Remember Dad being very careful around her. And then later there was you and everyone was happy again. But I was so young, Quinn. I might be wrong. Richard found a hospital record, Quinn said. Maria Torres gave birth to a girl named Sophia in December 1981. 2 months later, she and Roberto adopted me. Elena, what if Sophia didn't die? What if she was given up for adoption, or taken by Child Protective Services, or what if she's out there somewhere? Elena's expression shifted as she processed the implication. You think you have a biological sibling? A twin? I don't know what I have, but it would explain the DNA match. If there's someone out there who shares my genetics, someone who actually was in MacArthur Park in 1999, then they could be the real killer. Elena's voice was barely audible. Oh my God, Quinn. We need to find them. We need to find Sophia. But finding Sophia Torres proved nearly impossible. Richard hired 2 private investigators who spent weeks chasing dead ends. The adoption agency that had placed Quinn with Maria and Roberto Torres had closed in 1995, its records scattered or destroyed. The hospital where Sophia had been born had no record of what happened to the baby after the birth. Whether she'd been healthy, whether she'd been released to Maria's care, whether she'd survived at all. The court granted Richard's motion to access Quinn's original birth certificate, the one filed before her adoption. It listed her biological mother as unknown, and her biological father as unknown. A closed adoption, sealed by the courts with no information about where Quinn had come from or who her biological parents were. This isn't uncommon for adoptions from that era, Richard explained. Privacy laws protected both the adoptive and biological parents. Unless the biological parents chose to register with a reunion database, there's no legal way to identify them. What about DNA? Quinn asked. Can't we use the same genealogical testing they used to arrest me? Upload my DNA to those databases and see if there are any close genetic matches. Already done. I submitted your DNA to 3 different genealogical databases. We got hundreds of matches, 4th cousins, 5th cousins, the usual noise, but no one close enough to be a parent or sibling. Whoever your biological family is, they haven't submitted their DNA to these databases. Quinn felt the hope that had been building start to crumble. So we're nowhere. Not nowhere. We know you were adopted, which creates reasonable doubt. We can argue to the jury that there could be a biological sibling out there. Someone the IgG testing matched to your family tree but who isn't you. It's not proof of innocence, but it's doubt. And doubt is all we need. The trial began in October, on a crisp fall day when the air smelled like smoke from distant wildfires. The courtroom was packed again. More reporters this time, more cameras, more public fascination with the woman who'd supposedly lived a lie for 25 years. Quinn sat at the defense table wearing a gray suit Elena had brought, her hair pulled back, trying to look like someone a jury could believe in. Andrea Hollis's opening statement was devastating. She walked the jury through Jennifer Caldwell's life. A bright, promising student with dreams of saving the oceans. She showed them photographs of Jennifer alive and smiling, then photographs from the crime scene that made several jurors look away. She explained the DNA evidence in simple, clear terms that made it sound irrefutable. The defendant's DNA was found on Jennifer Caldwell's neck, Hollis said, her voice ringing through the courtroom. Not near the scene. Not on something Jennifer might have touched. On her neck, where the killer's hands crushed the life out of her. That's not coincidence. That's not contamination. That's guilt. Richard's opening was more tentative, building a case on uncertainty and possibility. We may never know exactly what happened to Jennifer Caldwell, he admitted. But we do know this. Quinn Torres was 17 years old in 1999, living in San Diego with no connection to Jennifer Caldwell or Los Angeles. And we know that Quinn was adopted as an infant, that her biological family is unknown, and that there could be biological relatives, possibly even a twin, whose DNA would be indistinguishable from hers. The prosecution wants you to believe that DNA evidence is infallible. But DNA can only tell you genetics, not identity. And in this case, that distinction matters. The prosecution's case took 3 weeks to present. They brought back Dr. Chun to explain the DNA evidence again, in even more detail. They brought forensic experts who testified about the strangulation, about the force required, about the hatred or determination it would take to squeeze someone's throat until they stopped breathing. They brought Jennifer's friends and family, who painted a picture of a vibrant life cut short. One of the most damaging witnesses was Jennifer's roommate from UCLA, Amanda Reyes, now a middle-aged woman with 3 children of her own. She testified that in the weeks before Jennifer's death, Jennifer had mentioned being followed. She said she felt like someone was watching her. Amanda testified, her voice shaking. She'd see the same car parked outside our apartment. She'd notice someone in the library who seemed to be staring at her. I told her she was being paranoid, that she watched too many crime shows. I told her she was fine. Amanda broke down crying. I should have taken her seriously. I should have protected her. On cross-examination, Richard tried to suggest that Jennifer's stalker, if she'd really had one, could have been anyone. But the implication was clear. Quinn had been stalking Jennifer. Quinn had followed her for weeks, planning, waiting. The fact that Quinn had been in high school in San Diego was irrelevant. A 2-hour drive. Anyone could make that drive. The defense's turn came in November, as the weather turned cold and the city put up Christmas lights that seemed obscene in their cheerfulness. Richard called his expert witnesses, forensic scientists who testified that while the DNA evidence was accurate, it couldn't distinguish between identical twins or, in some cases, between close siblings. He called adoption specialists who testified about sealed records and unknown biological families. And he called Quinn. She took the stand on a Wednesday morning, her hands trembling as she placed them on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Andrea Hollis watched her with the cold focus of a predator who'd already tasted blood. Richard guided Quinn through her testimony carefully, establishing her life story. Her childhood in San Diego, her parents' death, Elena raising her move to Los Angeles in 2009, her work at the community center. Did you kill Jennifer Caldwell? Richard asked. No. Quinn's voice was clear and strong. I've never met Jennifer Caldwell. I've never been to MacArthur Park before 2009. I was 17 years old in 1999, a junior in high school. I didn't kill anyone. Were you aware that you were adopted? No. Not until my attorney discovered it while researching my case. My parents, my adoptive parents, never told me. My sister never told me. I had no idea. Do you know who your biological parents are? No. Do you know if you have any biological siblings? No. But it's possible. And if I do, their DNA would match mine. Which means the DNA found on Jennifer Caldwell could belong to a sibling I've never met. Not to me. Andrea Hollis's cross-examination was brutal. She attacked every aspect of Quinn's testimony, her voice dripping with skepticism. You're asking this jury to believe that you have a secret twin out there somewhere who just happened to murder a woman in Los Angeles? That's quite convenient, isn't it, Ms. Torres? I'm not asking anyone to believe anything, Quinn said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I'm just telling the truth. I didn't kill Jennifer Caldwell. Someone else did. And the DNA evidence suggests that someone shares my genetics. Or the DNA evidence suggests exactly what it appears to suggest, that you killed her and have spent 25 years living a lie. No, I've spent 25 years living my life, teaching, helping people, building something good. That's not a lie. Isn't it true, Ms. Torres, that you have no alibi for March 17, 1999? No one who can confirm where you were that evening. I was in school that day. The attendance records show. School ends at what time? 3 p.m.? 4 p.m.? Plenty of time to drive to Los Angeles, commit murder, and drive back. I didn't have a car. I was 17. I took the bus to school. But you had your driver's license, didn't you? Yes, but... So you could have driven to Los Angeles if you'd wanted to. You could have borrowed a car, rented a car. It's a 2-hour drive. You could have been there and back in time for dinner. Quinn felt the trap closing around her. Every reasonable explanation she offered was met with a more sinister interpretation. By the time she stepped down from the witness stand, she could see the doubt in the jurors' faces. Not doubt about her guilt, doubt about her innocence. The final prosecution witness was brought in during rebuttal. Dr. Michael Zhang, a forensic psychiatrist. He'd never met Quinn, never evaluated her, but he testified as an expert on dissociative disorders and trauma-induced amnesia. Is it possible for someone to commit a violent act and have no memory of it? Hollis asked. Yes, absolutely, Dr. Zhang said. In cases of extreme trauma or dissociative episodes, the mind can essentially wall off memories that are too painful or disturbing to process. The person continues to function normally but has no conscious recollection of what they did during the dissociative state. So it's possible that Ms. Torres could have killed Jennifer Caldwell and genuinely believe she's innocent because she doesn't remember doing it? Objection. Richard was on his feet. Speculation. Dr. Zhang has never evaluated my client. Sustained, Judge Morgan said. The jury will disregard that question. But the damage was done. Quinn could see it in the jurors' faces. A new possibility had been planted. Maybe she was guilty and didn't even know it. Maybe the kind woman who ran a community center was sharing space in her mind with a killer she couldn't remember being. The jury deliberated for 3 days. 3 days during which Quinn sat in her cell and tried to prepare herself for a guilty verdict, for life in prison, for the death of every dream she'd ever had. Elena visited every evening, her face drawn and exhausted, talking about appeals, and next steps as if those words could build a ladder out of the pit they were falling into. On the 3rd day, the jury came back with a message for the judge. They were deadlocked. After another full day of deliberation, they returned again. Still deadlocked. Judge Morgan called them into the courtroom, asked if additional time would help them reach a verdict. The foreperson, a middle-aged black woman who'd been an accountant, said no. They were hopelessly split, 6-6, and no amount of discussion was going to change anyone's mind. A hung jury, a mistrial. Quinn felt dizzy with the complexity of emotions. Relief that she hadn't been convicted, despair that she hadn't been exonerated, exhaustion at the thought of doing this all over again. Andrea Hollis immediately announced that the state would retry the case. Justice for Jennifer Caldwell demands it, she told the assembled reporters. But something had shifted. 6 jurors had believed Quinn, or at least doubted her guilt enough to refuse to convict. That was something. That was a crack in the wall of certainty the prosecution had built. Richard used the mistrial as leverage. We can drag this out for years, he told Hollis in a negotiation Quinn wasn't present for but heard about later. And every day that passes, the defense gets stronger. We've got investigators working on finding Quinn's biological family. If we find a twin, your case evaporates. Are you willing to gamble your career on that? Hollis wouldn't agree to drop the charges entirely. She couldn't, not with the DNA evidence, not with the Caldwell family demanding justice. But she agreed to reduce bail to $500,000 and to postpone the retrial date to give both sides time to investigate further. Elena mortgaged her house to make bail. Don't, Quinn had begged. If I run, you lose everything. You won't run, Elena said with absolute certainty. You're not built that way. You're going to stay and fight and prove your innocence. So Quinn walked out of jail on a gray December afternoon, 7 months after her arrest, into a world that had become alien and hostile. She had to wear an ankle monitor that tracked her every movement. She couldn't leave Los Angeles County. She couldn't go within 500 feet of the Caldwell's house. And she couldn't return to the community center. The board had formally terminated her employment during the trial. Marcus had kept her apartment for her, paying the rent from his own savings even though she'd told him not to. When Quinn walked through the door, she found it exactly as she'd left it. The plants dead on the windowsill, a coffee cup still in the sink from the morning of her arrest, mail piled up on the floor. She stood in the middle of her living room and burst into tears, overwhelmed by the simple miracle of having walls and a door and privacy after 7 months of constant surveillance. But freedom was relative. Quinn quickly discovered she was a pariah in her own neighborhood. People crossed the street when they saw her coming. Mothers pulled their children away. The cashier at the grocery store wouldn't make eye contact. Someone spray-painted murderer on her apartment building's front door, and while the landlord removed it, Quinn knew how he felt when he told her, "You're paid through the end of the year. After that, you'll need to find somewhere else to live." The only place Quinn felt even marginally welcome was Reverend Thomas's church. The Baptist congregation was small, maybe 50 regular attendees, and some of them had stopped coming after Quinn started showing up. But Reverend Thomas himself never wavered. "The Lord knows the truth," he told Quinn after service one Sunday. "And the truth will set you free. Maybe not in the courtroom, maybe not in the eyes of men, but in the sight of God, the truth matters." Quinn wished she had his faith, but sitting in that church, listening to hymns and prayers, she felt a small sense of peace, a momentary suspension of the nightmare her life had become. The break in the case came on a February afternoon, almost a year after Quinn's arrest. She was sitting in her apartment, staring at her laptop screen, when her phone rang. Richard's number. "Quinn, we found something. Can you get to my office? Now." 20 minutes later, Quinn was sitting across from Richard and a woman she'd never met, mid-50s, with short gray hair and intense blue eyes. "This is Dr. Patricia Moreno," Richard said. "She's a genealogist who specializes in adoption research." "Dr. Moreno, please explain what you found." Dr. Moreno opened a laptop, turned it so Quinn could see the screen. A family tree filled the display, names and dates connected by descending lines. "I've been working on your case for 3 months," Dr. Moreno said. "Using the DNA matches from the genealogical databases, I've been building out your family tree, trying to identify who your biological parents might have been. It's painstaking work, but I finally got a breakthrough." She pointed to a name near the top of the tree. "Margaret Chun, born 1962. According to the DNA matches and genealogical records, Margaret is your biological aunt, your birth mother's sister. I located Margaret living in San Francisco." She was reluctant to talk at first, but eventually, she told me the story. Quinn leaned forward, her heart pounding. "What story?" "Your biological mother's name was Catherine Chun. In 1981, Catherine was 19 years old, unmarried, and pregnant with twins. Twin girls. The pregnancy was difficult. Catherine had severe preeclampsia. She went into labor 2 months early. The babies were born at St. Mary's Hospital in San Diego in December 1981. Both girls were premature, both had health complications. One of the babies, the stronger one, stabilized after a few weeks. That baby was you. The other baby, your twin sister, had more serious respiratory issues. She was transferred to Children's Hospital for specialized care." Quinn's hands gripped the arms of her chair. "What happened to her? What happened to my twin?" Dr. Moreno's expression was somber. "Catherine Chun couldn't care for 2 premature infants. She was 19, single, living with her parents who were immigrants struggling financially. The hospital social workers convinced her that adoption was the best option. You, the healthier twin, were placed with Maria and Roberto Torres through a private adoption agency. Your twin sister remained in the hospital for another 3 months. Eventually, she recovered enough to be released, and she was placed in a different adoptive home." "Who?" Quinn's voice came out as a whisper. "Who adopted her? Where is she?" "Her adoptive parents named her Sophia. Sophia Martinez." Dr. Moreno pulled up a photograph on her laptop. A driver's license photo of a woman who looked exactly like Quinn. Same dark eyes, same strong jawline, same olive skin. A mirror image wearing a different expression. Something harder and more guarded than Quinn had ever seen in her own reflection. "Oh my God," Quinn breathed. "She's real. She's actually real." "She's real," Dr. Moreno confirmed. "And Quinn, she lived in Los Angeles in 1999. She was attending community college in Pasadena, the same city Jennifer Caldwell grew up in." The room seemed to tilt. Quinn gripped the desk to steady herself. Is there any connection between Sophia and Jennifer?" "That's what we need to find out," Richard said. "I've already contacted Detective Park and the DA's office. They're investigating now. But Quinn, this is it. This is what we needed. You have an identical twin whose DNA would be indistinguishable from yours, who lived in the right area at the right time. This creates reasonable doubt. Hell, this creates more than reasonable doubt." Quinn couldn't stop staring at the photograph. Sophia, her twin sister, a person who'd existed her entire life, growing up parallel to Quinn, unknown and unknowable. I want to meet her, Quinn said suddenly. I want to talk to her. I don't think that's a good idea, Richard said carefully. Not yet. If Sophia is involved in Jennifer's death, then I need to know. I need to hear it from her. Richard, she's my sister. My twin. We shared a womb. And now she might have destroyed my life, either by killing Jennifer Caldwell or by just existing in a way that pointed the DNA evidence at me instead of her. I need to see her. Dr. Moreno and Richard exchanged glances. Finally, Richard sighed. Let me see what I can arrange. But Quinn, you need to prepare yourself. If Sophia is guilty, she's going to deny it. And if she's innocent, she's going through the same hell you've been through. Suddenly discovered to have a twin she never knew about. Suddenly implicated in a murder by virtue of genetics. The meeting with Sophia Martinez was arranged for the following week, in a conference room at Richard's law office, with both women's attorneys present. Quinn barely slept the night before, her mind churning with questions and scenarios. What did you say to a twin sister you'd never known existed? How did you ask someone if they were a murderer? Sophia arrived 10 minutes late, accompanied by a sharp-faced attorney named David Grossman. Quinn's first thought was how strange it was to see her own face on someone else, moving in ways she'd never moved, arranged in expressions she'd never made. Her second thought was that Sophia looked exhausted and afraid, the same way Quinn had looked in the mirror every day for the past year. They sat across from each other at the conference table, two women who shared DNA but nothing else. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Sophia said, "So you're my twin?" Apparently. Quinn's voice sounded strange in her own ears. "I've spent the last week looking at your face in the mirror and trying to process this," Sophia said. "We have the same nose, the same stupid cowlick on the left side, the same hands." Quinn looked down at her own hands, then at Sophia's. "Identical. Did you kill Jennifer Caldwell?" The question came out blunt and graceless. Sophia's expression hardened. "No." "Did you?" "No." "So we're both innocent, and yet one of us is probably guilty, because the DNA doesn't lie." Sophia leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms. "I've been going through my life with a microscope, Quinn, trying to remember spring of 1999. I was 17, just like you. I was living in Pasadena with my adoptive parents. Both dead now, by the way. I was finishing my junior year at Pasadena High School. And yeah, I knew Jennifer Caldwell." Quinn's stomach dropped. "You knew her?" "Not well. She was 2 years older, went to a different high school. But Pasadena's not that big. We were both involved in environmental clubs. She was doing beach cleanups, I was working on a school recycling program. We were at a few of the same community events. I remember her vaguely. Pretty girl. Really passionate about ocean conservation." Sophia's voice was flat, factual. "When the police came to me last week with your attorney's information about us being twins, they asked if I'd ever been to MacArthur Park. I said yes. I went there sometimes when I was a teenager. It was a place to hang out, smoke weed, avoid going home. My adoptive parents were not great people." "Were you at MacArthur Park on March 17th, 1999? Richard asked. "I have no idea. That was 25 years ago. I can't tell you where I was last March 17th, let alone 1999. David Grossman, Sophia's attorney, cleared his throat. "My client has cooperated fully with the police investigation. She's provided DNA samples, undergone multiple interviews, and voluntarily submitted to a polygraph test." "How did the polygraph go?" Quinn asked. "Inconclusive," Sophia said. "Apparently I have anxiety issues that make the results unreliable." "Imagine that." Her laugh was bitter. Quinn studied her twin sister, looking for signs of deception, of guilt. But all she saw was a woman who looked as lost and scared as Quinn felt. "One of us has to be guilty," Quinn said slowly. "The DNA was on Jennifer's body. Our DNA. That means either you killed her, or I killed her and don't remember, or there's a third option we haven't thought of," Sophia interrupted. "I've been thinking about this non-stop. What if there's another explanation? What if someone planted the DNA? What if How? Richard asked. The DNA was collected in 1999 from Jennifer's body. How would someone have obtained your DNA, either of your DNA, 25 years ago and planted it on a murder victim? No one had an answer. The four of them sat in that conference room, surrounded by law books and the weight of an impossible situation, and tried to find a solution that didn't exist. Finally, Sophia stood up. I didn't kill Jennifer Caldwell, she said, looking directly at Quinn. I barely knew her. I had no reason to hurt her. But I can't prove that, just like you can't prove you didn't do it. So we're both screwed. She turned to her attorney. Let's go. Wait, Quinn called out as Sophia reached the door. We should talk more. Get to know each other. We're sisters. Sophia turned back, and the expression on her face was pure anguish. Are we? We shared a womb for 7 months, 25 years ago. That's the only thing we have in common. You grew up in one family, I grew up in another. You became someone who helps people. I became someone who just tries to survive. We're strangers who happen to have the same face. She paused, her hand on the doorknob. But for what it's worth, I hope you're innocent. I hope we both are. I hope there's some explanation that makes sense. Because otherwise, one of us is going to prison for the rest of our lives. And I don't think either of us deserves that. After Sophia left, Quinn sat in silence, her mind reeling. Meeting her twin had answered some questions but raised 100 more. Who was Sophia Martinez, really? What kind of life had she lived? And was it possible for two people with identical DNA to be so fundamentally different that one could be a killer and the other couldn't? 2 days later, Detective Park called Richard with news. They'd found something in Jennifer Caldwell's belongings. A diary from 1999 that had been stored with her parents all these years. In entries from February and March, Jennifer had written about feeling watched, about a girl from one of her environmental volunteer events who'd seemed intense and kind of scary. She never names the girl, Park told Richard over speakerphone while Quinn listened. But she describes her as looking like she could be Latina or Asian, about her own age with dark hair and eyes. She says this girl kept showing up at places Jennifer went, the library, the beach, coffee shops. Jennifer thought she might have a stalker. That could be Sophia, Quinn said, her voice hollow. Sophia said she knew Jennifer from environmental events. Or it could be anyone, Richard argued. Jennifer's description is vague enough to fit thousands of people. And showing up at the same public places isn't proof of stalking or murder. But it was enough for Andrea Hollis. The next day, she held a press conference announcing that Sophia Martinez was now also a suspect in Jennifer Caldwell's murder. We're investigating both twins, Hollis said, her face grave on every news channel. The DNA evidence implicates their shared genetics. We will determine which twin is responsible, and that person will be brought to justice. The media went insane with the story. Evil twins. One of them a community hero, the other a troubled loner. Both with identical faces, identical DNA, and no clear way to distinguish between them. True crime podcasts dedicated entire series to the case. Amateur detectives on Reddit and Twitter analyzed every detail of both women's lives, looking for clues. The Caldwell family released a statement saying they didn't care which twin had killed their daughter. They just wanted someone held accountable. Quinn watched it all from her apartment, still under house arrest, still wearing her ankle monitor, still waiting for her retrial. But now Sophia was in the same boat, arrested, charged, released on bail with the same restrictions Quinn had. They were both living in limbo, two women with the same face trapped in the same nightmare. In late March, a year after Quinn's arrest, a third revelation came. Dr. Moreno called Quinn directly this time, her voice shaking with urgency. I need you to come to my office. I found something else. Something important. When Quinn arrived, Richard accompanying her, as he did everywhere now. Dr. Moreno had her family tree up on a large monitor, the branches extending in all directions. I've been digging deeper into your biological family, she said, trying to understand the full picture. And I found Catherine Chen's medical records from her pregnancy in 1981. And, Richard prompted, Catherine was pregnant with twins. That we knew. But according to the ultrasounds and medical notes, She was carrying triplets until about 7 months into the pregnancy. Dr. Moreno's hands trembled as she pointed to a medical report on the screen. One of the triplets died in utero in the 3rd trimester. It happens sometimes with multiple births. One fetus stops developing, is reabsorbed by the mother's body. The doctors noted it but continued monitoring the 2 remaining fetuses, you and Sophia. I don't understand, Quinn said. What does that have to do with? The triplet that died was declared non-viable at 7 months. But what if the doctors were wrong? Dr. Moreno pulled up another document, a newspaper clipping from January 1982. What if there was a 3rd baby that survived? What if Catherine gave birth to triplets, not twins, and that 3rd child was adopted separately? Quinn felt the room spin. Are you saying there's a 3rd person out there with our DNA? I'm saying it's possible. I've been searching adoption records, birth records, hospital records from that time period. And I found this. She displayed a document on screen, a birth certificate from February 1982, listing the mother as unknown and the baby's name as Baby Girl Chun. This child was born at Children's Hospital in San Diego, approximately 6 weeks after you and Sophia. The timing is wrong for a triplet, but the hospital is right, and the use of Chun as a surname is significant. I think there might have been complications. Maybe the 3rd baby was born even more premature than you and Sophia. Maybe she was kept in the hospital longer under different documentation. Richard leaned forward, his expression intense. Do you know what happened to this 3rd baby? The trail goes cold after the birth certificate. No adoption records I can find, no follow-up documentation. But Quinn, if there is a 3rd person with your genetics, a triplet who was adopted separately, then the DNA evidence could point to any of us, Quinn finished. Not just me or Sophia. There could be a 3rd woman out there who actually killed Jennifer Caldwell. The implications were staggering. Quinn felt hope and horror warring in her chest. Hope that this might finally explain everything. Horror at the thought of another person out there, another life that had been shaped by the same genetic lottery, another stranger wearing her face. We need to find her, Richard said. If she exists, we need to find her immediately. But finding a 3rd triplet proved even more difficult than finding Sophia had been. The adoption records were scattered or non-existent. The hospital had changed ownership twice since 1982, and many old files had been destroyed. Catherine Chun, their biological mother, had died in 2003 from cancer, taking whatever knowledge she'd had to her grave. Margaret Chun, the aunt who'd helped Dr. Moreno initially, insisted she knew nothing about a 3rd baby. As far as she'd known, Catherine had given birth to twins, both of whom had been adopted. Weeks passed with no breakthrough. Quinn and Sophia were both still under house arrest, both waiting for trials that kept getting postponed as new evidence emerged. They started talking occasionally, careful, tentative phone calls where they exchanged information about their lives, looking for clues, looking for answers. My adoptive parents never mentioned a triplet, Sophia told Quinn during one call. They barely mentioned that I was adopted at all. They weren't exactly the warm and fuzzy type. What were they like? Quinn asked, curious about the life her twin had lived. Mom was an alcoholic. Dad worked all the time to avoid being home. I basically raised myself. Sophia's voice was matter-of-fact, but Quinn could hear the pain underneath. What about yours? They died when I was 10. Car accident. But before that they were good, loving. They made me feel wanted. Quinn felt a pang of guilt, as if her relatively happy childhood was somehow an insult to Sophia's difficult one. So you got lucky in the adoption lottery, Sophia said without bitterness. I'm glad one of us did. These conversations were strange and dislocating. Talking to someone who had your voice but different experiences, your face but different memories. Quinn found herself liking Sophia despite everything, despite the suspicion that still lingered between them. Her twin was sharp and funny and deeply damaged in ways Quinn recognized even if she didn't fully understand them. The break they needed came from an unexpected source. In late April, a woman named Patricia Diaz walked into a Los Angeles police station and asked to speak to someone about the Jennifer Caldwell case. She was 58 years old, a former social worker who'd worked for San Diego County Child Protective Services in the early 1980s. Detective Park called Richard immediately. "We've got something. A witness who says she remembers your client's adoption, and possibly a third baby." The interview with Patricia Diaz was conducted with both Quinn's and Sophia's attorneys present, in a room at LAPD headquarters. Patricia was a tired-looking woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun. She sat across from them, hands folded on the table, and began to speak. "I've been following the news about the twins," she said, "and it's been eating at me because I remember that case. I remember Catherine Chun and her babies. I was new to social services then, only been on the job a few months. But I remember because it was unusual. Triplets born extremely premature, all 3 girls, all with different health issues." 3. Detective Park leaned forward. "You're certain there were 3 babies?" "Absolutely certain. I have notes." Patricia pulled a worn notebook from her bag. The kind of personal journal social workers weren't supposed to keep but often did anyway. She opened it to a page dated February 1982. "See? 3 female infants, born to Catherine Chun. Baby A, that would be you," she nodded at Quinn, "was the healthiest, placed with the Torres family. Baby B," she nodded at Sophia, "had respiratory issues but recovered, placed with the Martinez family. And baby C." Patricia's expression grew troubled. "Baby C was the smallest, had the most complications. She spent 4 months in the NICU. There were questions about whether she'd survive, whether she'd have developmental issues if she did. And Catherine Chun couldn't afford the medical bills, couldn't handle the stress. She'd already given up 2 babies for adoption. She certainly couldn't take on a third with significant health needs." "What happened to baby C?" Quinn asked, her heart pounding. "She went into the foster system initially, while the doctors tried to get her healthy enough for adoption. I remember placing her with a foster family in San Diego, the Kowalskis. But after that, I lost track. Foster placements weren't always well documented back then, especially for medically fragile infants. Kids moved between homes, paperwork got lost. By the time I checked in a year later, trying to follow up, the Kowalskis said they'd had to give the baby up. Her medical needs were too much for them. She'd been transferred to another family, but they couldn't tell me which one. So somewhere out there is a third triplet," Richard said slowly. "With no documentation, no known adoptive family, no trail." "I'm afraid so. I felt guilty about that case for 40 years. We lost her in the system. It happens more than it should." Patricia looked at Quinn and Sophia with genuine sorrow. "I'm sorry. I wish I had more information. I wish I'd done better by that third baby." After Patricia Diaz left, the 4 of them, Quinn, Sophia, and their 2 attorneys, sat in stunned silence. A third triplet, lost in the foster system, raised in conditions unknown. She could be anywhere. She could be anyone. "We need to search foster care records," David Grossman said. "Start with San Diego County in 1982 to 1983. Expand from there. And we need to go public with this," Richard added. "Get the media's attention. If this third woman is out there, if she knows she was adopted, she might come forward when she hears about her biological sisters." The press conference was held 2 days later with both Quinn and Sophia present, the first time they'd appeared together publicly. The visual impact was stunning. 2 identical women standing side by side, living proof that the DNA evidence couldn't distinguish between them. Richard and David made statements explaining about the newly discovered third triplet, asking for anyone with information to come forward. The media coverage was explosive. The story had everything: twins, a missing triplet, a decades-old murder, genetic mystery. News outlets ran split-screen images of Quinn and Sophia, playing Spot the Difference. Social media exploded with theories and speculation. And somewhere, Quinn hoped the third triplet was watching and would realize who she was. 3 days after the press conference, a call came into Richard's office. A woman who wouldn't give her name but said she had information about the third baby. Richard arranged a meeting, and Quinn insisted on being there, despite his reservations. The woman who walked into Richard's conference room was in her early 40s, with dark hair and eyes that looked hauntingly familiar. But unlike Quinn and Sophia, she carried herself differently. Shoulders hunched, eyes darting, the body language of someone who'd learned to make herself small and unnoticed. "My name is Rachel Kowalski," she said quietly. "I think I might be your sister." Quinn felt her breath catch. Rachel didn't look exactly like her and Sophia. She was thinner, her face more angular, her hair cut short. But the resemblance was there in the shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw. "The Kowalskis," Richard said. "Patricia Diaz mentioned them as the first foster family." "They were my foster parents," Rachel said. "Later they adopted me. They told me I'd been a preemie, that I'd had health problems as a baby. They said my birth mother couldn't take care of me. They never mentioned triplets or twins or anything like that. But when I saw the news, when I saw your faces," she looked at Quinn and Sophia. "I knew. I just knew." "Have you been tested?" Sophia asked. "DNA test to confirm?" "Not yet. I wanted to meet you first, to see if this was real." Rachel's story spilled out in fragments. She'd been raised in San Diego by the Kowalskis, Tom and Susan, both gone now. They'd been older parents, in their 50s when they adopted her, and they died within a few years of each other when Rachel was in her 20s. She'd struggled after that, addiction issues, bad relationships, periods of homelessness. She'd managed to get clean 5 years ago, was working as a medical transcriptionist now, living a quiet life in Oceanside. "I've never been to Los Angeles," Rachel said. "I mean, I visited once or twice as a teenager, but I've never lived there. In 1999, I was in San Diego. I was in rehab, actually, court-ordered after I got caught stealing. So there are records, if that helps." Quinn felt a wave of relief so powerful it made her dizzy. Rachel had an alibi for Jennifer Caldwell's murder. She'd been in a locked rehab facility in San Diego. She couldn't have been in MacArthur Park strangling a stranger. But if Rachel was innocent and Quinn was innocent, that left. Quinn's eyes met Sophia's across the table. Her twin's expression was unreadable. "I think we should all get DNA tests," Sophia said calmly. "Official tests supervised by the court. Confirm that we're actually triplets. And then we can all prove where we were on March 17, 1999. Put this to rest once and for all." The DNA tests were conducted under police supervision. Samples taken from all 3 women and sent to the state lab. The results came back 10 days later. Quinn, Sophia, and Rachel were indeed identical triplets, sharing 100% of their DNA. Any one of them could have been the source of the genetic material found on Jennifer Caldwell's body. Rachel's alibi checked out. She'd been in the Serenity Hills Rehabilitation Center in San Diego from February 15 to April 3, 1999, with detailed records confirming her presence. The facility had 24-hour supervision. There was no way she could have left, driven to Los Angeles, committed murder, and returned without being noticed. Quinn's alibi was weaker but still present, school attendance records showing she'd been in class on March 17, though she could theoretically have left after school and driven to Los Angeles. Sophia had no alibi at all. She'd been living alone in Pasadena, her adoptive parents largely absent from her life. She couldn't prove where she'd been that day, what she'd been doing, whether she'd gone to MacArthur Park. The DA's office made their decision in early June. They were proceeding with charges against Sophia Martinez only. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Sophia had known Jennifer Caldwell, had been in the right geographic area, had no alibi, and according to Jennifer's diary entries, may have been stalking her. Quinn's charges were formally dropped. After 15 months of arrest, jail time, house arrest, and public suspicion, she was finally free. The ankle monitor came off. The bail money was returned. Her record was cleared. But freedom felt hollow, because across town, her identical twin sister, a woman who'd shared her DNA, her birth, her genetic destiny, was preparing to stand trial for murder. And Quinn had no idea if Sophia was guilty or innocent. The media circus around Sophia's trial was even more intense than Quinn's had been. The triplet angle made it irresistible: 3 identical women, one of them a murderer, the other 2 innocent. Rachel stayed out of the spotlight, refusing interview requests, trying to rebuild her life in quiet anonymity. But Quinn couldn't stay away. Despite Richard's advice, despite the risk to her own newly restored reputation, she attended Sophia's trial every single day. The evidence against Sophia was circumstantial but damning. Prosecutors presented Jennifer's diary entries about being followed. They showed that Sophia had attended the same environmental volunteer events as Jennifer in early 1999. They established that Sophia had been troubled as a teenager, truancy issues, minor arrests for shoplifting and drug possession, a pattern of unstable behavior. Quinn Torres's life shattered on an ordinary morning when police arrived at her Echo Park Community Center to arrest her for the 1999 murder of Jennifer Caldwell. The evidence seemed irrefutable. Her DNA was found on the 19-year-old victim's body, discovered strangled in MacArthur Park 25 years earlier. Quinn had no memory of the crime, no connection to the victim, and insisted she was innocent. But DNA doesn't lie. The prosecution built their case on scientific certainty. Jennifer Caldwell had been an environmental science student passionate about saving kelp forests. Her diary mentioned someone who might have been stalking her, and the DNA evidence provided the breakthrough investigators needed after a quarter-century. For Quinn, a respected community organizer who dedicated her life to helping at-risk youth, the accusation was devastating. Her reputation crumbled, relationships fractured, and even her closest friend Marcus began to doubt her. During the investigation, geneticists noticed something extraordinary. Quinn's DNA showed unusual markers suggesting she might be an identical twin. Birth records revealed the shocking truth. Quinn was actually one of triplets born prematurely to Catherine Chun, a 19-year-old who'd given all 3 babies up for adoption. The triplets had been separated and adopted by different families, never knowing about each other. This discovery changed everything. Identical triplets share the same DNA profile, making them indistinguishable through standard genetic testing. The DNA evidence that seemed so definitive suddenly became ambiguous. It could have belonged to any of the 3 sisters. Quinn was still a suspect, but so were 2 women she'd never met. The investigation located Quinn's sisters. Rachel Kowalski, living in Oceanside, California, was a recovering addict who'd spent years battling substance abuse after a traumatic childhood with abusive adoptive parents. She'd been sober for 6 years and lived a quiet, cautious life as a medical transcriptionist. She had no memory of Jennifer Caldwell or MacArthur Park in 1999. She'd been deep in addiction then, her memories of that period hazy at best. Sophia Chun, who'd kept their birth mother's surname, was harder to locate. She'd also struggled with addiction and had a troubled past. When found, she too claimed no memory of the murder and seemed as bewildered as her sisters by the situation. The 3 women, strangers bound by genetics, found themselves ensnared in a case that science could identify but not solve. Quinn's trial proceeded despite the revelation of triplets. The prosecution argued that the DNA evidence, combined with circumstantial evidence placing Quinn in the area and matching descriptions from Jennifer's diary, was sufficient for conviction. The defense emphasized the reasonable doubt created by identical triplets. How could anyone prove beyond doubt which sister had been in MacArthur Park that day? The jury deliberated extensively. They understood the scientific reality. One of these 3 women had almost certainly killed Jennifer Caldwell. But which one? Without additional evidence to distinguish between them, they couldn't convict. Quinn was found not guilty, not because the jury believed she was innocent, but because the prosecution couldn't prove she was guilty beyond reasonable doubt. The prosecution then turned to Sophia, building a similar case. But they faced the same insurmountable problem. Identical DNA could not identify which triplet was responsible. Sophia's defense was even stronger because she lacked the geographic connections to Los Angeles that Quinn had. During Sophia's trial, Quinn testified about the nightmare of being accused based on DNA alone, of doubting her own memories and sanity. Sophia was also acquitted. The jury simply couldn't determine guilt when 3 identical suspects existed. Both trials ended in legal victories that felt hollow. Someone had killed Jennifer Caldwell, but the justice system couldn't determine who. Following the trials, the 3 sisters went separate ways. Quinn remained in Los Angeles, trying to rebuild her destroyed reputation. Her community center had closed permanently, and many people still viewed her with suspicion. She couldn't return to her old life, so she created a new one, volunteering and slowly reconstructing the trust she'd lost. Sophia disappeared entirely, relocating to the Pacific Northwest and severing all contact with her sisters. She became a ghost, leaving no trail, no explanations, no answers. Rachel returned to her quiet life in Oceanside, maintaining her sobriety and avoiding the spotlight. She and Quinn developed a tentative connection, calling each other annually on their shared birthday. But their relationship remained superficial, strangers connected only by genetics. 8 years after the trials, Patricia Diaz, the social worker who'd handled the triplets' adoptions, called Rachel with a deathbed confession. Dying of cancer, Patricia revealed that Sophia had contacted her years earlier and confessed to killing Jennifer Caldwell. Sophia had described following Jennifer to the park at 17, becoming obsessed with her, attempting to talk to her, and then panicking when Jennifer tried to flee. The confrontation had escalated to violence. Sophia had strangled her, not intending murder but causing it nonetheless. Sophia had blocked out the memories for years through trauma and substance abuse. But when arrested, the memories returned. Rather than confessing, she'd recognized that the existence of identical triplets created reasonable doubt. She'd stayed silent, let the system's inability to distinguish between them work in her favor, and walked free. Patricia also revealed that Sophia had died 3 months earlier from an overdose, likely suicide, driven by guilt that had finally become unbearable. The confession was corroborated by Sophia's journals, found after her death, which contained detailed descriptions of the murder and her subsequent guilt. With Sophia's confession and death, Jennifer Caldwell's case was officially closed. The Caldwell family, now elderly, finally had answers after 37 years, though the resolution brought limited peace. They publicly acknowledged their belief in Quinn's innocence and apologized for the suspicion she'd endured. Quinn built a new community center called New Foundations in Highland Park, focusing on helping people who'd been through the justice system or been wrongly accused. She launched the Jennifer Caldwell Environmental Initiative, teaching children about ocean conservation in honor of the woman whose life had been stolen. Marcus rejoined her work, and slowly she reconstructed a meaningful life from the wreckage. Rachel continued her quiet recovery in Oceanside, maintaining sobriety and developing a deeper relationship with Quinn. The two sisters, separated at birth and reunited through tragedy, built something real despite having no shared history beyond genetics. A documentary about the case premiered years later, exploring the intersection of DNA evidence, identical multiples, and the limitations of justice. The Caldwell family chose not to watch, tired of their grief being public entertainment. At the premiere, they met Quinn and offered forgiveness, acknowledging they'd always known she wasn't capable of murder. Quinn wrote an influential essay titled, "When DNA Tells the Truth and Lies at the Same Time," sparking national conversations about genetic evidence's limitations. She explored how DNA could identify genetics but not guilt, how science could be simultaneously irrefutable and insufficient. By the case's 10th anniversary, Quinn had built a thriving organization helping hundreds. She was 54, marked by experience but defined by resilience. She couldn't undo Sophia's crime or bring back Jennifer Caldwell, but she could honor that lost life through meaningful work, teaching children about the oceans Jennifer wanted to save, helping families find stability, proving that character transcends genetics. Quinn Torres' journey illuminated profound questions about identity, justice, and science. DNA testing had become a cornerstone of modern forensics, yet this case revealed its blind spots. When individuals aren't biologically individual, when genetics are shared absolutely, science provides certainty about relatedness but not responsibility. 3 women shared identical DNA but had completely different characters, shaped by their separate adoptions, experiences, and choices. Rachel survived abuse and addiction to build a stable life. Sophia, damaged by similar circumstances, made a fatal choice at 17 and lived with crushing guilt until it destroyed her. Quinn, given the gift of loving adoptive parents, dedicated herself to helping others despite being nearly destroyed by false accusation. The story asked, what defines us? Our DNA or our choices? What happens when the most precise scientific evidence becomes ambiguous? How do we survive when innocence isn't enough, when truth doesn't guarantee justice? Quinn's answer was action. Unable to change the past, she chose how to respond, with compassion, determination, and the stubborn belief that one person's choices matter. She couldn't bring back the dead or undo injustice, but she could help others survive their own impossible situations. Jennifer Caldwell, frozen forever at 19, never got to save the oceans she loved. But through Quinn's work, her memory inspired new generations to care about conservation. It wasn't the justice her family deserved, but it was meaning carved from tragedy, imperfect, incomplete, but honest about its limitations. In the end, Quinn Torres proved that survival wasn't about convincing everyone of your innocence. It was about knowing it yourself and choosing to keep living, building, helping, transforming tragedy into purpose, one deliberate choice at a time. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.